And now on BBC News, we have a special programme looking back at that bin lorry crash in Glasgow a year ago in which 6 people died. Some viewers may find some of the scenes in this programme distressing.
On the 22nd of December last year, a bin lorry careered out of control in the centre of Glasgow. For 19 seconds, it ploughed over roads and pavements, reaching speeds of up to 25 miles an hour. When it came to rest, 6 people were dead and more than a dozen suffered life-changing injuries.
Tonight, some of the bereaved families accuse the Scottish justice system of failing them.
It wasn't unfortunate, I'm sorry, but it was your mum is in the morgue.
The man fell through every single safety net that's been put in place from the top level, from the Crown to doctors to Glasgow City Council.
These 6 people who died, they just can't be gone. They're not here today to speak for themselves.
Today, George Square bears no evidence of the horror that was visited on this place nearly a year ago.
But the human scars run deep, both through the survivors and the families of those who lost their lives. And as they await the report of the fatal accident inquiry into the crash, some of those families have broken their silence to question the Crown's approach to the investigation and to ask if they'll ever get justice.
Scenes of panic captured on a mobile phone seconds after the bin lorry left a trail of destruction along Queen Street and George Square.
I know it's me because I see a handbag, which was mine, and I see an umbrella, which was mine, and I know I could see my feet. So actually to look at it, it's so surreal.
Saleswoman Elaine Morell suffered serious facial injuries and still can't remember how she came to be caught up in the bin lorry's path.
I instantly was knocked out, so I was unconscious. And I think I must have been unconscious for between 5 and 10 minutes. I know that.
This was like a steel door that just came crashing down on my head and turned out all the lights. And I just remember thinking, oh, right, so that's it. That's the end.
We'd been to the jewellers and we're on our way back to the train station. We'd basically, neither of us really knew Glasgow very well, so we'd just kind of retraced our footsteps the way that we'd come.
Lucy Ewing was on a trip to the city with her mum, Gillian.
I think we'd come out past the National Galleries and then we're walking up Queen Street towards the train station. I had heard quite a loud bang, but kind of after that, I don't really remember much other than being on the road and seeing the bin lorry come up the street towards my mum. And then obviously I saw it hit her.
A distraught Lucy was taken to a nearby cafe.
It was just sirens and flashing lights and just people everywhere.
Lucy frantically tried to get in touch with her family.
Lucy just literally said to me on the phone, I don't want to alarm you, but there's been a serious accident in Glasgow and I think Mum might be dead.
A city was in shock. As word spread, people were checking on the whereabouts of their families and friends.
I got a phone call to say that my mum hadn't been to pick the girls up.
Adam Russell's mother, Jackie Morton, worked in a tax office in the city centre. As the hours passed, he took action.
I actually proceeded to call the number that came up on the screen. And they took us through a whole rigmarole whereby it was like what your mum was wearing, what kind of clothes. I was actually like a surreal moment. Then hours went past.
For some people, their loved ones wouldn't be coming home. Hundreds of emergency workers were drafted in to take control and start the investigation into what happened. The crash had happened at lunchtime, and families fearing the worst could only wait. It was 10 o'clock in the evening before Adam Russell received a phone call from police.
He said, just to let you know, Mr. Russell, we've phoned around all the hospitals and your mum's not there, so there's a possibility she's at the square. And I said, what do you mean she's at the square? She said, there's a possibility she could be one of the victims that's lying at George Square. Would you like us to send a colleague over to speak with you? We wouldn't be able to get there until about 12 o'clock at night, or would you rather just leave it till tomorrow?
The Ewing sisters said they encountered similar police insensitivity as they waited in Glasgow city chambers.
He said, we've just heard back from all of the hospitals and we can confirm that your mum is not on the list of people who are in the hospital. Therefore, she must be one of the ones in the morgue. That is how we were told. That was pretty much the exact words.
In the morgue?
In the morgue. So it wasn't unfortunate, I'm sorry, but it was a, your mum is in the morgue.
When we put this to Police Scotland, they said that in such a major incident, everyone is affected and working under extreme pressure, and that they were sorry for any anguish caused and had learned from the experience. 6 people lost their lives that day. Jackie Morton, a tax worker and grandmother of 2 from Glasgow. Gillian Ewing from Edinburgh, who'd been living in Cyprus. 18-year-old English literature student Erin McQuaid. Her grandparents, Lorraine and Jack Sweeney, who lived in Dumbarton. And 29-year-old primary school teacher Stephanie Tate from Glasgow. The driver of the bin lorry, just visible on the left of the screen, was 58-year-old Harry Clark, who'd worked for the council for 4 years. He told an off-duty nurse who came to help him that he hadn't blacked out, but that the last thing he remembered was sitting at the lights.
I felt so sorry for the bin lorry driver and his colleagues, for those poor men to have witnessed such a devastating incident. And I actually was worrying.
The tragedy cast a shadow over any festivities as the city mourned. Out of respect, the Christmas lights were switched off. Strangers paid tribute. But some of the bereaved families were already beginning to question the sympathy for Harry Clark. They felt there was more to the crash than just an unavoidable accident.
I actually couldn't sleep at night at the time it had happened, so I actually took to Google Images, just basically to see if there was an image of my mum lying on that street. Horrific. When I was scrolling through the pictures, I actually seen Harry Clark climbing out of the bin lorry. So then I started to ask questions with both police and CID. I said, I've got this picture on my iPad. I said, I believe it to be the driver of the bin lorry. They dismissed it and said that no way that could have been the man. This man was gravely ill in a hospital bed, and he has been since the accident.
The investigation worked quickly. At the end of February, 9 weeks after what happened here, the Crown made an announcement.
This news release from the Crown says that after a Crown Office-directed police inquiry, independent Crown Counsel decided there was no evidence to suggest Harry Clark had broken the law. The Crown decided not to prosecute.
I think there was a general outpouring, I suppose, of grief at the time because of the place where it happened, the circumstances that occurred, and the time of the year. And that appears to have driven Crown Office to make decisions as quickly as they could Generally, these things tend to take quite a long time. As an average, it would be probably something in the region of about 9 months between the time of the accident and the police reporting the matter and the matter actually being proceeded to court if appropriate.
A fatal accident inquiry into the crash was quickly convened. The purpose of an inquiry isn't to lay blame, but to investigate and learn lessons. The families had steeled themselves for what they regarded as a necessary ordeal that might bring them some answers. The family of schoolteacher Stephanie Tate was represented by Ronnie Conway.
It was clear from the outset that with Harry Clark, we're really not dealing with a criminal mastermind. And the question immediately for them was, how had such a person managed to manipulate and game the system with such ease?
But some of those also acutely affected by the tragedy felt ignored by the investigation. Marie Wetherell had suffered multiple fractures in the crash and spent 4 weeks in hospital.
I felt like a spectator in my own life, that all this stuff's going on outside. Nobody ever contacted me about anything. I had one letter from the Procurator Fiscal's office saying I might be called as a witness, I might not be called as a witness, but they'd let me know. Well, they never did. And everything that I ever found out subsequent to the accident, I found out myself.
The inquiry was to take 5 weeks and involve more than 500 witness statements. We've managed to acquire just some of the medical and employment records, hospital records and expert opinion that was used in court. They run to thousands of pages. Did the Crown know all of this when it decided not to prosecute?
Day by day, the inquiry laid bare failings involving the DVLA and its system of medical self-reporting.
What you've got, in effect, is a system which relies exclusively on the honesty and integrity of the applicant. Where you're dealing with professional drivers whose livelihood is at stake, it seems to me that the temptation to conceal or not disclose medical incidents is simply colossal. And that is a system which is dysfunctional.
The attempt to get to the truth behind the tragedy in George Square repeatedly returned to Harry Clark's fitness to be employed as a driver.
It was the entire medical history that came out. I just remember sitting that day and they were talking about episodes of stress and dizziness and other vasovagal attacks dating back from late 1970s. If you've had that many episodes of fainting or dizziness, it beggars belief, to be honest, that someone is able to still drive after.
Within Harry Clark's long and complex medical records was a blackout in 2010 when he was a driver with First Bus. Harry Clark told his doctor he blacked out in a canteen. These are the guidelines given to doctors by the DVLA. If it's a simple faint, they don't need to be notified. Based on the canteen story he was told, Harry Clark's doctor determined it was a simple faint. But during the inquiry, it was revealed it may have happened on a bus.
If it emerged that Mr. Clark had slumped at the wheel of a bus, there's really not much doubt that this was a notifiable incident to the DVLA. There's really not much doubt in terms of the DVLA protocols that Mr. Clark would have lost his LGV licence for probably about a year. He would not have been able to apply for a job with Glasgow City Council, which he did later on in 2010. He would not have been at the wheel of a Glasgow City Council bin lorry in December 2014.
A bus inspector's report taken at the time of the faint records it happened on a bus, not in a canteen. The inquiry unearthed a paper trail of Harry Clark's driving declarations to the DVLA and his employers, revealing his dishonesty about his fitness to drive. He never disclosed that he'd suffered a blackout or dizziness. As the inquiry continued, it became clear that the only man who could answer these allegations of lying was Harry Clark. But two of the families had raised the possibility of pursuing a private prosecution. This threat meant Harry Clark was advised not to comment on anything which might prove incriminating.
It was one of the most harrowing days of our lives. I mean, having to sit there and listen to him continually say, I don't wish to answer that, I don't wish to answer that, I don't wish to answer that. It was just, and then every time he did go to answer something, his solicitors stand up and say, don't answer that.
It was extraordinary, you know, to hear him not say anything. And then he gave his side of the story, you know, and, you know, it was just like he was a victim as well, really.
On August 28th, the fatal accident inquiry closed. It had heard 27 days of evidence, often suggesting Harry Clark was a man who'd persistently and deliberately lied. His own lawyer had described him as an ordinary man with the failings of an ordinary man. We've been in touch with Harry Clark. For the first time, he revealed his feelings about that day in a letter through his lawyer.
I understand that the impact of this event on me is irrelevant when compared to the loss that the families of the victims have suffered. I wish to unreservedly apologise for my role in this tragic event. I am aware that the families of the victims of the incident will have many unanswered questions. I will try to answer all of those questions to the best of my ability at the point I'm able to do so.
Hours after the inquiry closed, the Lord Advocate took the unusual decision to publicly reaffirm his decision not to prosecute. He was interviewed by BBC Scotland's Revel Alderson.
We have to take hard decisions and a cold analysis of the evidence, and we did it as quickly as we could without compromising thoroughness. There's no evidence which has come out at the fatal accident inquiry, which the Crown were not aware of at the time that the major decisions were taken.
You're absolutely clear about that. Nothing has come out that you didn't know about.
Well, what I did was I checked with the inquiry team to confirm that. That's my understanding, and that was confirmed to me.
The fact that the Lord Advocate can still stand there and say, sometimes you make difficult decisions, but I know I made the right one, when they've got hundreds of people out in the public screaming at them, this guy really should have been convicted for something.
And it just seems incredible that somehow or other the legal system made it possible for that person not to have to account for himself one way or another. It's just, to me, that's morally wrong.
The Crown was clear. Its February decision not to prosecute was the right one. But some of the families were questioning that and were asking if they'd ever get justice.
Back in February, when it decided not to prosecute Harry Clark, a news release from the Crown announced David Green would be leading a preparation for the fatal accident inquiry. As head of the Scottish Fatalities Investigation Unit, he'd been involved in the Crown's response to the tragedy from an early stage. Just over 2 weeks later, David Green held separate face-to-face meetings with the families to explain the independent Crown Counsel decision.
David Green proceeded to tell us that Mr Clark had had a one-off episode which occurred in April 2010, whereby he'd fainted in a canteen in a hot environment, and this was a one-off event. And then he proceeded to tell us that in 2012, when he went for his DVLA renewal as part of his HGV renewal, he answered no to have you ever blacked out or lost or impaired consciousness. Well, he's obviously lied on that question, because you've just said previously there that he had a blackout in a canteen. He then proceeded to tell me very abruptly, argumentative, that we were comparing apples and pears.
The families say it was described to them as a simple faint in a canteen. Such a faint, while standing up, would not have been notifiable to the DVLA. The Ewing sisters also questioned why this apparent lie didn't warrant prosecution.
I had obviously said so he lied. David Green said no, he didn't tell the truth. I said, that's the exact same thing as lying. And I was promptly told, the thing you don't know about Mr. Clark is he's a fat, uneducated man from the west of Scotland and doesn't know any better. Now, I'm not defending Harry Clark, but that's not a very nice thing to say about anybody, and it's not very professional either. It's what we were told as to why he ticked no on a form instead of ticking yes, because he's fat and uneducated.
It also suggests that there are different standards of criminality depending on how smart you are. So because I've been to university, I wouldn't get away with ticking a form wrong because I would know better. But if I hadn't, then I'm allowed what leeway on getting these things right? That doesn't make any sense.
Adam Russell said it was some weeks later, when his lawyers were sent productions from the Crown, that he learned of another version of the blackout, that Harry Clark had fainted at the wheel of a bus.
He's had a more or less mirror image of an event whereby he's fainted behind the wheel of a large vehicle.
This version of the blackout was, according to the Crown, the true account of what happened. Harry Clark had fainted on a bus with passengers on it, not in a canteen. Under the DVLA guidance, a faint while sitting and at the wheel is a notifiable incident. Adam believed this made Harry Clark's omissions to his employers and the DVLA far more serious. He said he had a growing suspicion the Crown had missed the significance of Harry Clark's faint on a bus when they made the decision not to prosecute. He made an official complaint.
The response was that Mr. Green couldn't actually recall that he had said that Mr. Clark had fainted in the canteen in a hot environment, and that he had actually stated that Mr. Clark had fainted whilst having his lunch on a stationary bus.
And you, your father, your mother's sister, and 2 members of your legal team heard otherwise?
Yep.
We were specifically told he passed out in a canteen. Nothing, no mention of on a bus.
The response to Adam Russell's complaint said David Green did not recall having made reference to an incident in a canteen, although his colleague thinks he may have done so. And it's not just the families of Gillian Ewing and Jackie Morton, but all the bereaved families are certain that David Green made no mention of a loss of consciousness on a bus during those individual March meetings. They are all certain he told them it happened in a canteen. And this poses the question as to why, at those meetings, the Crown only offered the canteen version of events. We asked David Green for an interview, but he declined. The Crown Office said in a statement that David Green had been fully aware that the driver had a previous faint on a bus when he met the families. It said David Green had extensive experience and categorically denies using offensive terms. It added that there were conflicting accounts from different sources of the faint, but it had been clear to Crown Counsel that the primary account was of the driver fainting in a stationary bus.
I feel very let down. If by law he couldn't be charged, I think there needs to be changes then made to the law.
If the Crown Office had decided to prosecute Harry Clark, what charges might have been considered?
The prosecution, if it was deemed appropriate, would be based upon the fact that Mr. Clark had a knowledge of a medical condition from which he suffered. And the real problem is not the fact that he knew he was going to have an attack that day. The real problem is he did not know when he was going to have an attack. And if you could establish that, then, in my opinion, that would be certainly providing a case to answer for dangerous driving.
We asked the Lord Advocate for an interview. He declined. In a statement, the Crown Office reiterated their position that there is no question of the Crown having been unaware of the possibility that the April 2010 incident occurred on a bus, or failing to take that into account when deciding not to prosecute. It added the Lord Advocate had made it clear there was no evidence led at the inquiry which indicates the decision not to prosecute was wrong.
I do think that the Crown Office rushed to a decision in this particular case And I suspect if they had their life to live over again and had heard all of the information that came out of the fatal accident inquiry, the decision in relation to Mr. Clark may well have been something different.
The families we've spoken to believe there are hundreds of Harry Clarks out there, taking risks and preserving their careers with no enforced deterrence. And they question what justice has been achieved after a criminal investigation and a long and painful fatal accident inquiry. But above all, they hope something is done to tackle the human and system failings that contributed to the bin lorry crash, in the hope that no other family has to go through what they have endured.
Hi there. Storm Desmond is bringing some severe flooding to parts of Cumbria. The Met Office have issued their top red weather warning. This is a scene in Appleby, one of the places that's hit by flooding. Water already halfway up shop windows on the waterfront here, so the red warning will stay in force. We've got a lot more rain to come. This is really just the beginning of what looks to be a very nasty spell of flooding indeed. It's across West Scotland and Cumbria, as well as Snowdonia, we'll see the heaviest falls of rain. But amongst all of this, 18 hours more of rainfall across Cumbria, where we could see rainfall perhaps amounting to as much as 300 millimetres of rain by the time we get to the early part of Sunday. That kind of rain is similar to what brought severe flooding back in 2009 to Seathwaite. So we are likely to see severe flooding problems increase over the coming hours. The floodline number certainly worth keeping close to hand. The rain is just one feature of Desmond, the other being the wind. Some very gusty winds through Snowdonia, gusts here around 80 miles an hour at the moment, and then blowing across the Pennines. Similar gusts here, 60 to 70 mile an hour gusts for southeast Scotland and northeast England pose the risk of transport disruption too. That's your weather.
This is BBC News. I'm Maxine Mawhinney. The headlines at 2.